The Compliance Perspectives podcast is sponsored by Case IQ, a global provider of whistleblowing case management and compliance solutions. Learn more at caseiq.com. Welcome to the Compliance Perspectives podcast. I'm Adam Turteltaub from the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics in Healthcare Compliance Association. Joining us today from the Jersey Shore is Debbie Sabatini Hennelly. Debbie is founder and president of Resility, and today we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, chatbots, helplines, and some of the factors that lead people to whistleblow internally or not. Debbie, let's start by something interesting you shared with me that revealed that people would often rather report issues to a chatbot. Do you think that speaks to comfort with technology, a lack of trust in people, or something else?
Sure. And first, thanks for having me, Adam. I always love talking with you about just about everything. That report I was referencing was something that Case IQ produced recently as a report on a survey they'd done with, I think it was almost 1,100 employees from several countries, including the US and Canada. And I was surprised to read that, generally speaking, employees were quite open to using AI in helpline solutions. And particularly in the US, it was something like 70% said they had no worries, no concerns about using AI in these processes. Some of the reasons they talked about were the increased anonymity, the trust that it truly was anonymous, the ease of use, and they perceived it to be fairer than talking to a human. The one big theme that seemed to come out was people talked about wanting opacity and transparency about the process. So, how are you using it? Are you, ensuring that my information remains private? Just like I think with everything we do online, data privacy is an issue when we're talking about our personal stuff. The interesting difference compared to talking to a human was the trust issue. And I think trust is a common thread through a lot of what we talk about when we talk about the effectiveness of helplines and speaking up generally.
It's both interesting and troubling that people are more willing to trust a machine than they are to trust the people that they work with. So what do you think leads to more calls to the helpline?
Well, I think there are a lot of things. And I think most importantly, it is trust, trust in us, trust in the compliance office or HR if HR is the owner of the helpline. And that I think it also includes contacting us directly. If people feel that we're responsive, if they feel that we will keep their information confidential or anonymous, if they've called in anonymously, that's really important. That's, most of what it takes. And I mean, aside from good communication, which I think is the rest of the ball game. If we are communicating what the process is, how we keep it anonymous. I think third-party vendors, from what I recall from research, not just Case IQs, but not having the helpline run from in-house, the call center or many of these helpline vendors now have web interfaces that are actually used more than call centers by employees, particularly I would imagine younger employees. But they need to know what happens. So we have to be very good about clearly communicating the process, how we keep things anonymous, what happens if I call, what's next when I call. Some of the vendors are better than others with those scripts, helping us with a script that is clear and concise and not scary. And then we also have to remember that employees are getting bombarded with all kinds of messages. And this goes really for the communications around the compliance program generally. We have to be, often speaking about this, not just once a year in code training. So I think that's it. Trust and communicate, communicate, communicate.
We've addressed what can get some more calls. Now let's look on the other side, which are what are some of the subtle things that can kill off calls before they even come in?
Going back to the Case IQ report, and this is very much aligned with reports I've seen from Navex and other vendors. A lot of employees are saying they've seen misconduct and yet not reporting it. So why is that? So Case IQ's number was 80% said they've witnessed misconduct, but only 41% feel comfortable reporting it. That's scary. So there's all that other stuff going on we're not hearing about in the compliance office. The biggest issue in their report and in every report I've seen in the 25 years I've been doing this, the biggest issue is fear of retaliation. And, subtle or not so subtle, retaliation is either real or perceived, and it's the biggest reason people won't call. They fear that it will come back to them, that there will be retribution for raising an issue. Now, that perception might come from actually knowing somebody who raised an issue and then felt some sort of retaliation. Or it might just be a perception, and perception can come from word of mouth. It can be a myth. It can be lack of our communicating what we're doing. And, in the silence, people will fill in the blanks. But that fear of retaliation is something we have to be aware of. We have been surveying this for, decades in our culture surveys. But once you know that people fear this, like these numbers we heard from Case IQ, then what do you do about it, right? So you, and there are many things we can do about it. First of all, we have to make sure that there's a clear prohibition of retaliating against anybody who raises an issue. But people also need to understand that retaliation or retribution can be subtle, not just firing somebody, but it could be a feeling of being, shunned from your team, or it can be that you don't get the good assignments, or you don't get invited to the, golf outing, or, that gets, I think, a little less subtle. But definitely fear of retaliation is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, of the obstacles. And unfortunately, it's one that we in the compliance office don't have a whole lot of control over addressing. It's really got to come from leaders and managers in the organization, creating an environment that feels safe. Because hopefully, generally speaking, we're not the ones retaliating, right? So somebody out there in the organization is behaving in a way that's scaring people from raising a concern. And so we need the help of leaders and managers to address that. The second issue is the one that we do have a lot of control over, and that is that people might be skeptical about whether we're actually going to do something if they call. And so, given reason number one, why should they stick their neck out and call us or alert us to something if they believe it's just futile because nothing's going to happen? So we have to be really good in the compliance office about why they should speak up, number one. And we also have to say, here's, thank you for calling. Here's the next step. Here's what happens next. We'll stay in touch. If we're slow in responding, if we're slow in giving people updates, then they're going to have that feeling that this wasn't worth the risk. But believing that nothing will be done also can come from well, I reported and they talked to me and I see that they interviewed other people, but then I never heard anything. So we have to be good about closure. You coming back to the reporter and letting them know whether or not their issue, their concern was substantiated or not. And while we can't tell them if it was substantiated and we took some kind of disciplinary action, I mean, they might see that somebody's no longer on the team, but we have to keep that piece of it private, but we can tell them that action was taken. And then there are, I would say, three kind of lesser things that I always try to flag in helping clients build these processes. One is understanding that people can feel embarrassed about calling. What if I don't have all the information yet? What if it's just a suspicion? And in our communications, we have to make clear that even a suspicion of wrongdoing is something we want to hear about. And, we can do the digging. They don't have to do the digging. In fact, we don't want them to do the digging. Another one is just not wanting to embarrass somebody else. So if the wrongdoing or the concern is about one of their colleagues, then maybe there's a sense of loyalty. Maybe they would feel really badly for this other person. Maybe they talk themselves out of calling and telling us because, well, maybe this is just a mistake, or maybe somebody else will see it and report it, and I don't have to be the one who embarrasses them. The one thing I would want to flag that is sort of a technology issue, and this kind of goes back to the vendors. We need vendors to make it easy for employees to ask a question. We need the system to be set up so that when the person logs in, if they're doing it in the web interface, or when they call the call center, the script that they hear or that they see makes clear that it's not just for reporting, but it's also for questions. Because we want, in our data, we want to know these are the reports, these are the questions. Because the questions very often are the things that can help us understand where maybe our policies or our training are lacking. So if the technology doesn't make clear that questions are okay, we're not going to get those calls.
Let me wrap this up with one last question. We obviously need leaders on board. How do we help them resist temptation to immediately ask, who said that, when they hear of an allegation?
Everybody wants to wash their own dirty laundry, right? They don't need problems on their team getting outside the team. That's sort of the default position. And so it's through our training that we can help leaders understand that this is something we have expertise in doing, getting to the bottom of this, and that what we need them to do is create that environment that I was talking about, making it feel safe to raise concerns. That's their role. That's what we hold them accountable for. And that, in fact, in the training of leaders and managers, we have to make clear that when they ask a question like that, or worse yet, when they try to do their own digging to find out what's going on, who's being interviewed, why didn't I know about this? They're actually obstructing the investigation, and they need to understand that. One of my favorite ways to do this, particularly if I have a leader who is persistent about getting involved in an investigation, is something that one of my colleagues many years ago taught me to do, and that is to gently say, I'd like to help you avoid becoming a witness in this investigation. If you're too involved here, you would end up being deposed. And you know how much time and energy it takes to go through a deposition, I'm sure, because you've seen the TV shows, right? So let's make sure that you let us do our job. We'll involve you at the right time when either we need to ask you for information or we need to update you on what we found. But it would really be helpful if you could support the fact that we're the experts and we'll get to the bottom of this, and trust that we'll be thorough.
And given that no one wants to be a part of a deposition, I think that's a very good place to start. Well, Debbie, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. I'm Adam Turteltaub from SCCE and HCCA. I hope we're able to expand your compliance perspective.